I want to share a few things that have happened to me since moving to the land down under. I moved to Australia in 2018, built a home with my partner in far north Queensland. The area where we built is part of the Daintree Rainforest. We are surrounded by rainforest and the Coral Sea is about 50 meters through the dense bush. Things were relatively quiet until about 5 weeks ago. Now we are seeing Min lights, or spook lights. Little balls of light that are far too big and bright to be glow bugs, moving through the trees and about the property. We hear booms and bangs against the outside walls of our newly built home. We grab a flashlight and go out to see what's going on. The noise is so loud that if it had been a bird or a bat, the poor thing would have broken a neck, or at least stunned itself. The property is fenced in, gated, and locked. There are no rocks or clouds of dirt on the concrete, nothing on the sides of our house as if kids were pulling a prank. It literally sounded like hands banging against the walls. We get up to go see, then come back in, get back in bed, and it happens again. It's like it's toying with us, being mischievous. The locals and Aboriginals have told me about Yowie, which is similar to the United States version of Bigfoot. They've also told me about Bunyip and other Dreamtime creatures that reside in and make the Daintree their home. It is one of the oldest rainforests on the planet. We are surrounded by the beauty of nature, and now it's like every night is a new adventure. We don't know what might happen next. Nothing happens inside the home, just on the property. I've done research online and at the local library. Can't find anything other than the occasional Yowie sighting. I've gotten in touch with a few ghost hunting teams and asked my questions. I'm waiting for a response to see if they might know anything. My partner's sister said that we may have built our home on a grave site, but I doubt this. Not everything is built on a grave site. It may just be the land itself. I know the Daintree is very special to the Aboriginal. It's sacred, in fact. Why is it that when things like this happen, I never have my cell phone in hand? It's like I'm so caught up in the moment, all I can do is experience it. But I'm going to try to capture something on film. I'd really like to know what's going on. At a house that I used to live in, my room was upstairs, and creepy stuff was always happening. One night, my little cousin spent the night with us and wanted to sleep in bed with me. There were knocks and noises, and the next thing I know, she's laughing. I asked her why she was laughing, and she told me, "Stop tickling my feet." I never touched her feet. I took her downstairs and we camped out on the floor that night. I never told her what was really going on. I told her it would just be fun, but there was no way we were staying up there after that. In 2001, a couple of days after my mother gave birth to my brother, she brought him home from maternity. I was 7 at the time. My brother's cot was in my parents' bedroom, right next to their bed. That first night of my newborn brother being home, my dad was working a night shift, so I went to sleep next to my mother, as I usually did when my dad would be working nights. Around 2 or 3 in the morning, my mom and I both wake up at the same time and look at each other, confused as to why we woke up, realizing that my brother was still fast asleep. Or at least wasn't crying or making a noise. We listened for any other noise that might have woken us up, but nothing. Not a minute later, this whooshing loud noise fills the room, and we feel a strong breeze or wind. Then we hear the whooshing sound again, this time closer to my baby brother's cot. My mom jumps out of bed, freaking out that somehow the window was left open and a bird got in. Now that whooshing sound was exactly like wings flapping, but it was more like massive wings were flapping, not a regular bird. And the gust of wind it created was also massive. Lights go on, my brother is awake now, but was not scared by the noise or the wind. He was just kind of looking around. My mom starts looking for birds when I point out that the window is in fact closed. She still makes me get up and have a look around with her for anything that could explain it. We had a chat afterwards about it, and she told me that as soon as she got over the shock, she heard a voice telling her, "It's okay," just as she was about to check up on my brother. In the moment, she assumed I was trying to calm her down. But when I denied it, she realized that the voice didn't sound like me at all. I also heard the "it's okay," and it sounded genuinely reassuring. It's worth adding that we heard and felt the winged thing come, but we never heard or felt it leave. We stayed up the rest of the night, waiting for something else to happen, but it never did. While the noise and all scared us initially, we both felt relaxed, relieved, content, and happy all at the same time. It's hard to describe the feeling. Mind you, the whole thing happened in like 10 seconds, but that weird feeling stayed with us the rest of the day. When my dad came home and was told the story, he was genuinely worried, and my mom just told him that it's okay, he has nothing to worry about. At his puzzled look that my mom hadn't joined him in being worried, she just said, "Trust me, I have a good feeling about this." Now, I don't know why she said it like that, but at the same time, I completely understood it. It's been a long time since this happened, but it's still very clear in both mine and my mom's memories. I have tried to look this up through the years, but came up empty. I would love to get an idea of what it was. I'm not exactly sure what this was, but I saw something strange in the woods outside of Homer, Nebraska. There's an old graveyard out here that's infamous for having a witch buried there, and it's kind of a local spot for kids to go and scare themselves. Most of the land out there is flat and used for farming, but this graveyard sits on the edge of a big hill and is surrounded by thick woods all around. Anyway, one night at around midnight, 5 of my friends and I decided to go out there in the woods and find the grave, because the one in the actual graveyard is fake, and supposedly the real one is out in the forest. So we begin our adventure trekking through the dark night forest. I was in the back because I'm the biggest and strongest. It doesn't take us long to find the real grave, as a couple of the people I was with have been there before. We stick around for a couple of minutes just messing around and trying to scare each other, when we all just get this instinctual feeling of dread. I know a lot of stories talk about this, but it's a very real feeling, like your body is responding to danger before you can even realize what's going on. It's probably worth mentioning that as a kid, I lived in a haunted house, and I've been in situations where I've been attacked with a knife and jumped, and I've never felt this feeling before. We just decided to get away from that grave. Now this is where us being stupid teenagers almost got us killed. One of the kids I was with says that some people grow substances out here, and that he knows where to find some. So even though we all clearly felt something was wrong, we decided, screw it, let's get high. As we started walking back through the woods again, I began to feel like we were being watched, and every now and then I would hear rustling of leaves or just the crackling of undergrowth from behind me. I told my friends we needed to move faster, but they were all saying that I was trying to mess with them. Eventually, as we keep walking, we stumble upon a clearing and we can't really see anything ahead of us. All of a sudden, my friend starts taking off for the other end of the clearing, and we all go after him. All around us, we can hear cattle freaking out. That might sound anticlimactic, but you try getting chased by a 1,200-pound bull. So, after we get a couple hundred yards away from the cows, something else scares them way worse than us. I mean, I have never heard a sound like that coming from an animal. It was a horrible mix of the cows being scared to death by something, and like an unearthly, ear-shattering scream. We got the heck out of there in the opposite direction. Now, by this time, I realized we were lost in the middle of the woods at 2 a.m. with something stalking us. I finally convinced everyone that we should change our direction so we could get to the road. And about 30 minutes later, we're making progress as someone spots some headlights way out in front of us that we can see on top of the hill we're on. So we start walking down toward the road when I noticed that the sounds behind us had started back up again. I turn to my friend and I tell him to point his iPhone flashlight back behind us. I only saw something for a second, but about 30 yards behind us, I saw a blackish-brown figure with yellow eyes lean its head out from behind a tree and then quickly duck back behind. This is what really freaked me out, as animals around here don't sneak around and duck behind trees. I got the best look at it out of my friends, and the head looked kind of like a gaunt German shepherd. There aren't any wolves or bears around here. As far as I know, there are no large predators at all. It was a little bit elevated, but it was still eye level with me. I'm 6'3", and this thing was at least 6 feet. At this point, I take off. I swear I've never run that fast in my life. We make it to the road in under 5 minutes, but we realized that we came out on the other side of the woods, and we had to walk back the 3 miles down the road toward our cars. It was honestly the scariest night of my life. And to make things worse, I ended up losing my wallet out there that night. I've been back multiple times, but never at night now. Whatever it was not a human or an animal. Based on other stories I've heard, I think it might have been a skinwalker or a dogman. But your guess is as good as mine. This is an experience I had that I can't really explain. This occurred in the summer of 2010. My stepdad has an old hunting cabin out in Pennsylvania. It's like a 10-minute drive outside of Cook's Forest. It's a small place with a common area, a kitchen, and a single bedroom with 2 bunk beds and a queen-size bed. My mom, stepdad, and I stayed at the cabin for a weekend to get rid of all the trash that other family members had left there and to do any repairs. There are other cabins nearby, but this weekend there was nobody else at the cabins within a half-mile. There were also no streetlights or even cell service. This is quite literally off the beaten path, in the middle of the forest. We came up Friday, worked all day Saturday, and left on Sunday. Saturday evening, after dinner and a bonfire, everything is pitch black outside. No bugs chirping, dead quiet, which is relatively normal. At least most of the time, it's pretty quiet at night. We decide to head in. My stepdad and I are inside reading, while my mom steps out to have a smoke and check to make sure that the fire has burned down to a safe level. I'm mid-page down in my book, and I hear my mom yelp pretty loudly. Now, I'm used to hearing her make this yelp. She's done it when she has seen a snake or gets a bug in her hair, so I didn't really think much of it. She comes in limping, though, and she says, someone threw a rock at me. Immediately, my stepdad grabs his gun and runs outside, hoping to catch whoever did it. I was in shock, not sure of what to think. I'm sitting with my mom while my stepdad makes laps around the cabin. He fired a few warning shots at the backstop we have set up on the back of the property to scare off whoever was around. We never saw anybody run off or even make a noise. When we go up, we always make jokes about Bigfoot now. And to be clear, there were no cabins on the road near us that had people staying at them. So I have no idea who would have been lurking in the woods in a pitch black forest just to mess around with people. They would have had nowhere to go, nowhere to stay, no transportation. It just makes no sense. Did we run into Bigfoot? Maybe. But as of now, I don't know. When I was younger, I used to collect porcelain dolls. They were my jam something fierce, and I got them for any sort of gift-giving holiday and just because. I had over 200 of them, ranging from brand new from the store to very old from thrift shops and tag sales. So, of course, some of them were haunted. For the most part, they weren't bad though. One really liked a little chair I had a different doll in and would constantly knock it out of it until I put her in it, even though she didn't fit so well. And another that was really old but very pleasant to have around was kind of like a guardian. I felt so much safer with her in my room. But then, there was him. Boy porcelain dolls are hard to come by, so when my stepmom found this cute magician boy at the store, she snagged him for me for some holiday. Now, he was brand new, like fresh from the store, never been opened, and there were more like him. He specifically wasn't special or odd or anything like that. I was thrilled to have him. He had a little stool that his little top hat sat on. He wore a standard little boy outfit with a generic starry magician cape and a black wand with white tips that tied to his hand to make it look like he was waving it. I put him on a shelf that was by the foot of my bed and next to the door, facing out into the room, not at my bed. One of the few open spots I had left for my ever-growing collection. That night, I had trouble sleeping, and I had these weird, scary dreams. Nightmares aren't that unusual for me. I used to have them a lot when I was younger, but these were different than my usual ones. Dark and malicious, but still not abnormal. In the morning, he seemed to be facing my bed a bit more than before. I chalked it up to forgetting how I had placed him. Whatever, it was fine. The nightmares continued, though, getting worse over the next several nights until I just couldn't handle it anymore. I'd wake up from something horrific and feel something malevolent staring at me from the doorway of my room, which was basically at the foot of my bed. Somehow, I just knew that it was the magician boy. He gave off this terrible vibe, and the area around where I kept him just felt wrong. I finally told my stepmom what was happening, and that I thought it was the boy, and that I didn't want him anymore. He was too scary. She didn't disbelieve me, but she also said that I was overreacting, and that since boy dolls were so hard to find, she would take him. I said yes, but I thought he should just get out of the house altogether. So she brings him downstairs to her room and sets him with the rest of her dolls, also on a shelf between her bed and the door. That night, she's all snuggled up with her son, who I want to say was about 3 or 4 at the time. They shared a bed. When he wakes her up in the middle of the night, a little spooked. She asked him what was wrong, and he points at the door and says, "Mama, who's that? I don't like him." The doll was stored in the attic the next day and sold on eBay a few days later. The weird nightmare stopped once he was gone, and the scary man was never seen again. Good luck, whoever bought him. I just got this beautiful antique baby doll from Etsy. Something about her really caught my attention, and I just had to have her. I do collect antique dolls and trinkets, but I knew since day one that this one was different. I have used 2 different kinds of EMF meters on her throughout the day, and I have received various intelligent responses, both with the EMF and with the spirit box and combined. She doesn't have any batteries of any sort in her that could give off a faulty reading. I have had my phone in a different room with the lights off while conducting multiple tests with the EMF, and I ensured that she wasn't anywhere near walls or light switches. I'm looking for a logical explanation here. If I can't find one, I may just assume that this doll truly does have a paranormal attachment. About 4 years ago, we had to live with my mom's friend for a while. The day we came to her house, we were moving things in and I went out to get some of the last things in the car. When I went outside, sitting in the car, clutching the steering wheel, was my mom's friend, staring at me, wearing a red dress with her hair down. I knew it wasn't her because I had just seen her 10 seconds earlier in the house with her hair up in a bun, and she was wearing a light pink sweater with white pants. I ran back inside and found my mom and her friend talking in the kitchen. I told them what I had seen. We looked out of the window of the living room where the car could be seen from, and nobody was there. None of us left the house for the rest of the night. We finished getting the stuff out of the car the next day. That was not the last paranormal thing that happened to us in that house. I've been debating with myself for months whether or not I should tell this story, and today, I finally feel like it's time. I need to tell people about this, and I need someone that knows about this to hear it. I lived in a farm around 4 years ago. From the moment we moved there, I could tell something was wrong. I felt uneasy in there, as if there was something constantly spying on me. A little detail about the place and situation. We didn't technically own the place. It was borrowed from a woman that was trying to sell it. Call it a demo. So we didn't have access to the house, and we slept in a wooden storage house. The farm itself was like this. There was a barbed wire gate that you manually had to move in the entrance, and in front of it there was an open, empty field with one of those outside washrooms to the right. Passing by it, there was a small group of trees, and then the place where we slept. Passing that was the actual house, to the left, and then the forest. In the forest entrance, there was a tree with a ripped plastic bag tied to its branches, meaning the bag was tied while it was still small. People used to do that here to mark something. And right in front of it, there was a mound. Someone buried something there. I moved there with 4 dogs, plus there was the dog that already lived there that we took care of. Our routine was to wake up at 5 a.m. and to go into the city, so I could go to school and my parents could go to work. The first night we stayed there, I noticed my room was the only one in the entire house that didn't have a lock. I couldn't sleep because of the weird feeling I had. I stayed up all night and slept on my way to school. Then, things got weirder. The door started opening at night. I dismissed it as the wind. Cliché, I know. But it became more frequent and more violent. Then, still in the very first week, I saw it. It was a black humanoid figure with a white face. It was like the white face had empty eye sockets, and instead of a mouth, just had an empty cavity on its face. It stood on my door entrance, staring at me. I decided I would not sleep while I lived there. I couldn't bring myself to move or do anything, so I just kept staring at it, trying to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Some nights later, it became impossible to pretend, because it started moving and doing things. It entered my room. It tapped on the window. It was a metal window that was right beside my bed. It started to slightly move things and kept being a general creep. Whenever I flashed light on it, it disappeared, but the eerie feeling stayed there. I started keeping a flashlight in my room and playing music to keep myself awake and calm. Eventually, of course, I started falling asleep during the day, and on some days I woke up with headaches and the feeling that my eyes had been pushed into my skull. I woke up with pain. Eventually, my parents got security cameras, because while we were in the city, some people entered the place to go fishing. There was a shortcut to the neighboring farm's lake through the forest. This is important because of what happened next. Then one day my aunt went to visit. She had some weird superstitions and said that the place had gold buried on it for some reason. She went to the forest and saw the mound under the marked tree I talked about before, and she decided it was a good idea to unbury it, and so we did. Bad idea. There's a certain feeling of digging dirt that differs from rocks or mud or clay. I learned that this day as I dug the hole. Then, after going through a small layer of fragmented rocks, I hit something soft and resistant that felt like leather. I hit it harder and pushed through it. Immediately after it, there was something hard with a complex and detailed shape. I tried to break through it, since my aunt insisted it was protection for the gold, and my parents were just whipping me into helping her. But it was no use, and it occupied most of the area of the hole, so we couldn't dig around it. It was like the hole was made specifically to bury it. My aunt said then that we should cover the hole. She didn't cover it and went home. That night was hell. There was no tapping on the window. There was a strong banging. The thing kept entering my room non-stop, and even the flashlight stopped working. I had to stay awake, feeling everything just pressuring me, pressing in on all sides. My door wouldn't close. That thing would make noise, and it would just be there, staring at me. All the security cameras stopped working the moment that it all started. There were 4 cameras, one pointing to the front of the house, one pointing to the washroom, one on the back that showed my window, and one that pointed to the forest. That morning, I went to check the camera footage, and all the cameras had stopped working, except for the one pointing to the forest. There was only static for all the other 3, but that one just had a small blur. After that night, it never appeared again. I still couldn't sleep out of the fear, but it never actually showed up again, and things got calmer. We moved out some time after that. I keep thinking about it even now, 4 years later. It was just too real, and there were things that were noticed by other people too. I especially keep thinking about that thing we hit while digging, and how that night was the worst. I keep asking myself if maybe we found a body or something haunted that was hidden for a good reason. I grew up in a house that was built in 1902. I was born in the late 80s, so the house had been remodeled a few times. It was a 2-story house with 3 bedrooms and a tiny bathroom on the second floor. The bathroom was at the top of the stairs, and my room was across the hall at kind of an angle. My sister and my parents had rooms farther down a long, narrow hallway. For as long as I can remember, I saw a ghost. I called her Pam. My mom told me that I began talking about Pam around the age of 5, and that I never stopped. My mom never believed any of this and just brushed it off as my wild imagination. Pam was pink and transparent, a see-through, totally pink little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old. She knew that I could see her, and I knew that she could see me. But she never made a sound. Ever. Nothing. She walked around only the upstairs and never came down the steps. Honestly, I have no idea where the name Pam came from. Growing up, Pam would sit at the top of the stairs, waiting for me to run up to the bathroom after I got home from school. I would walk around her because she was always there, every day. If she wasn't sitting on the step, she would just be sitting on a bed or standing in one of the rooms or the hallway, harmless for the most part. However, if I ignored her, she would mess up my bedroom while I was gone doing my paper route. When I would get back home, my parents would be all sorts of angry over my messy room. But if I just said a quick hi, she wouldn't mess with me. She never touched me, and I also never physically saw her move anything with my own eyes. But I would get really scared and nauseous every time she would destroy my room behind my back. So I learned very quickly to say hi to her every day. At the age of 15, my mom put me into therapy because I was still bringing up Pam here and there. Pam was still always around. I was used to her, and she wasn't doing anything, so she didn't come up in conversations as often. Therapy helped, but not with Pam. When I was 17, my parents decided to put our house up for sale. I don't know if it was all the people walking through or me packing up my stuff, but something triggered Pam, and it got real crazy. About a month before our new house was built and ready to be moved into, I was asleep in my room. My bed was against the wall, and I could lie on my side and see right into the bathroom. While asleep, I had a dream of Pam, still transparent, standing in the doorway of the bathroom. She pointed up, and for the first time in my life, I heard her talk. She said, "Look, that's my mom." I sat up in bed and from the light fixture saw a dark-haired woman hanging lifelessly by a rope. Her boot fell off of her foot and hit the floor, and I woke up. Holy crap. I couldn't say anything because my family never saw her. They didn't understand. Pam wasn't in their lives like she was in mine. I didn't really dwell too much on it. It was a dream, right? Pam was back to sitting on the top step the next day, life as usual. But 2 weeks later, I had another dream. It started out exactly like the first one. The bathroom light was on, and I could kind of see into it while laying down on the bed. But this time, I heard a weird grunting and splashing. I sat up and saw, clear as day, the woman that had been hanging from the light fixture was not only alive, but was holding Pam, no longer translucent, under the water in our bathtub. She was drowning Pam in our bathtub. I don't have any idea what made me wake up, but I could not contain my emotion. I ran down the hall and jumped into my parents' bed as a 17-year-old. It was just my mom in there. I think my dad fell asleep on the couch or something. But I was hysterical. I told my mom everything through tears and gasps for air. My mom didn't know what to say. Then, in the middle of my sadness, Pam walked into the doorframe of my parents' bedroom. She was transparent again. I quickly laid down really close to my mom and pulled the covers over my head. I just remember saying, "Oh my gosh, Mom, she's in here." I held my breath, and seconds later, I felt cold, small hands on my back, shoving me against my mom. I kept yelling, "Stop touching me." My mom could only reply with, "I'm not touching you." This went on for what felt like forever, but was probably only a matter of seconds. When she stopped, she just stood there at the side of the bed, staring at me. She didn't move. I pulled the covers over my head again, and I ended up crying myself to sleep while my mom held me. We were both shaking horribly. I moved all of my stuff out the next day, and I slept on the floor of our unfinished house the next few nights until my bedroom was done. I never went back. Shortly after my family moved out completely, and before the next buyers moved in, the entire back of the house and the entire garage went up in flames. The official cause was listed as spontaneous combustion. The first people to buy and sell the house after us lasted 10 months there. They called my parents to tell them that they couldn't keep the window or closet door shut in the room with the black carpeting. That was my bedroom. I saw the house posted a couple of months ago on Zillow, and the only picture of my room shows the door open a crack. You can see a bit of the black carpeting, but there's nothing in the room. The rest of the house is furnished. I've tried so hard to find any information about the girl that's in my old house, but there's almost no information at all, just basic architecture and lot line documents. It's the craziest story, but this was my childhood. Part of me feels sorry for Pam, but another part of me knows that there's something strong and dark in that house. I know Pam loved me in a way, but there's no way I would ever go back. This happened yesterday, and I can't stop thinking about it. My boyfriend wasn't home, and I had put my phone on charge behind the couch. I sat down and started reading. About 10 minutes later, I heard my boyfriend shout, "Baby," and I sat up, startled. He sometimes does this when he comes home just to make me aware of his presence before he comes into the room, because I always jump if I don't hear him come in. I sat for a second because I couldn't hear any movement, then turned around to get off the couch and go see him and see what he was doing. As I got up, my phone lit up, and it was a text message from him, literally just a few seconds after I'd heard him call me. I thought nothing of it until I opened the living room door, and he wasn't standing in the hallway. I checked my phone, and he'd actually texted me something pretty urgent, and it made me even more freaked out that I had heard him shout so clearly. It felt like in some weird way, whatever it was trying to get my attention, to turn around and get my phone. A few years ago, I was a CNA, certified nursing assistant, and I worked at a nursing home. I had a few encounters there, but nothing prepared me for everything that would happen when I started working at a hospice home. It's essentially where people go to die, people that are very sick and don't have a lot of time. The facility was amazing and worked quickly on getting people in. The point is, a lot, and I mean a lot, of people passed away in the building. And a lot when I was working, which was from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I always opened the window in the resident's room after someone passed away, my way of feeling like the spirit wouldn't be trapped. No one else did this, unfortunately. On to the main point of the story. We have 2 wings of the building, and each wing has a huge linen closet. Tons of sheets, blankets, comforters, towels, washcloths, gowns, you name it. When you open the door, both walls are lined with racks filled with linen. You can walk down into the room a couple 100 feet, and then turn to the right, and it's a little area where extra stuff is stored. Things for the bed baths and hygiene things for the residents. You are completely hidden when you're in the area on the right. A resident woke up around midnight and wanted to get cleaned up, so I was going to give them a bed bath. I went into the linen closet and headed to the area on the right. I was grabbing some soap, toothbrush, toothpaste, a little basin, and other things. And that's when I heard the closet door open and close. We have one CNA and one RN, registered nurse, on each wing during the night shift. I figured it was the nurse or the CNA for the other side. Sometimes we grab each other if we need help. I then heard a female voice say, "Hello?" I said, "I'm just grabbing stuff for a bath. Do you need help?" I figured it was a nurse. I hear, "I'm so cold." "I can bring you a blanket," I said. "Maybe I'll throw it in the dryer again like last week." I laughed. I turned around and headed to walk back down the main area of the linen closet, and nobody was there. I didn't hear the door open again, so no one left, and there's no place to hide. I then feel someone grab my shoulder. I scream and drop everything as I turn around so quickly, but no one's there. I ran out of there so fast. I tried to tell the nurse what was happening, but I wasn't making any sense until I calmed down. She stuck by my side the rest of the night, and I didn't go back into the linen closet that night. When they grabbed me, it felt like it touched my bare skin, and it was so cold. This was one instance of so many encounters that I experienced there. I was talking to an old friend about maybe going on an impromptu ghost hunt this month, and during the conversation, we reminisced about some of the creepy stuff that we had experienced over the years. We remembered a particular event that stuck out with us, and it's one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced. The story begins with my friend, who we'll call T, and myself searching a hidden attic-like space in his house for a supposed stash of money allegedly left there by a previous tenant. Truth be told, I think that was just a story his mom told us to get us off the Xbox for a while. It was the heyday of Halo, and she was probably just sick of us sitting in front of his TV. But whether or not the story she told us was true, we wound up in this small and low-ceilinged attic space, which could only be accessed by a tiny door, hidden in the wooden panels in the wall. We'd known about the door for a while, but had never bothered to go in, mostly because the door seemed like it had been sealed somehow, and we couldn't be bothered with actually using our brains and finding something to pry it open. But the prospect of finding free money in a dusty old room was too much, so we called a few friends to come help search the place. And after a few pries with a putty knife and a flathead screwdriver, we cracked the door open and began to explore. At first it didn't seem like much was in there. Some old clothes and papers scattered about, and a desk in the corner. But through the gloom and dust, we could see something against the far wall, which turned out to be a very old cot of some kind. It was either busted in half or was meant to fold in half, but either way it was folded over on itself, and we could see something covered in cloth and sandwiched between the two halves. Of course, we wouldn't be good treasure hunters if we didn't look at the covered thing, so we start making our way over to the folded cot. I take a few steps forward, and my foot goes right through the floor like it's made of wet paper. Luckily, though T was right behind me, he had very quick reflexes. His hand shot out and grabbed the back of my shirt to keep me from falling forward, and probably all the way through the floor. We took a second to laugh at the situation, and realized that we should probably stick to the sides of the room, as the center was most likely the weakest, and probably the most likely to collapse under our weight. So we tiptoe all the way around the wall of the room, until we get to the cot, where we start unfolding it to get to the covered thing. This is where things got strange. As soon as we touched the cot, the room got very cold, which was odd because we were in an attic in mid-July. At the time, we thought nothing of it. We were certain we had found the stash. We were moments away from being rich. So we unfold the cot, which took all of our combined strength from how rusted and decrepit the thing was. Honestly, I was surprised it didn't just crumble to dust at the first touch. Finally, we got it unfolded and found that it was, in fact, a decently sized wall mirror that had been wrapped in a sheet or a thin blanket. As soon as we uncovered the mirror, the tiny door that we had come through slowly swung shut. Again, we didn't think anything about it. Must have been a gust of air or something. We were a little disheartened by the lack of money, but T's mom had sent us in there with her camera to take pictures of anything interesting, so she could see what was inside, since she wouldn't be going in herself. So we snap a couple of pictures of the mirror, the cot, and the random debris lying around. Now here it's important to note that the mirror's reflective surface was absolutely caked with dust. You could barely tell that the mirror was a mirror, the dust was so thick. Yet the base of the mirror, which looked and felt like it was made of some sort of ceramic, was practically pristine. When I say the base, I mean the part of the mirror in which the reflective surface was set, not the actual bottom of the mirror. I found that to be very odd, as the whole mirror had been covered by the sheet. So why would any of it be dusty at all, let alone just a specific part like that? So we snap the pictures and are about to call it quits, when we hear the dogs barking downstairs. That usually meant that somebody was at the door. So we carefully make our way along the walls and out of the room to head downstairs. It turned out to be our friend, who we'll call B, who had come to help us search for the supposed stash. After we told her about the attic room, she wanted to see it for herself. So naturally, we took her up and showed her the tiny door. Before we even set foot into the room, we told her about the crappy floor and to only walk along the walls. Of course, she either didn't take us seriously or she just didn't understand what we had said, because she takes a couple of steps toward the cot and falls almost all the way through the floor, practically right through the small hole that I had created earlier. So she's sitting there with her upper body still in the attic and her legs dangling down through the ceiling of the kitchen. It was at this moment that I heard one of the most hilarious sentences I've ever heard. Through the now large hole in the floor, we could hear T's mom on the phone with someone, when she said in a very flat and nonchalant tone, "I have to go now, there are children falling through my ceiling." So we get B out of the floor and have a good laugh about the situation, and once we're sure she was okay, we all agreed it was probably best to just leave the room alone, before we caused any more damage. We get out and all the way downstairs, when T pipes up that he'd forgotten the camera and a flashlight in there. So I agreed to go back in with him to grab them. We thought it wouldn't take but a second, as he remembered setting them both down on the floor, close to the hole, when we were helping B get out. But when we got there, we were a little confused. We couldn't see the camera or the flashlight anywhere. We looked all over the floor, thinking maybe we'd kicked them around on our way out, or when we were helping B, but they weren't there. We were about to go check if he had maybe set them outside the door or something when we were shutting it behind us, when T stopped dead in his tracks and whispered my name. I looked over, and in an instant, I knew what had made him stop. The mirror was covered up with the sheet again, only this time the outline of the camera and flashlight could be seen under the cover. We stood there and stared at it for a good minute or two before T got brave enough and started making his way along the wall to get over to the cot. I followed on very shaky legs, and I watched as he pulled the cover off the mirror to reveal that his camera and flashlight were indeed hidden under the sheet, along with the words "Help me" scrawled in the dust beside them. It was like something out of a horror movie. And honestly, if I hadn't been there, I wouldn't believe it. The nope factor must have been too much for T, because he snatched up his stuff and made a beeline for the door, with me close behind. We slammed the door shut behind us and never went back in. T's mom thought we were making the whole thing up, until we went back and looked through the camera. We had pictures of the cot and the mirror, both before and after messing with them. One of the folded cot with the covered mirror still hidden, one of the open cot with the covered mirror revealed, and one of the uncovered mirror, which showed no writing in the dust. But there was one final picture, which convinced his mom that we were telling the truth, and that she should never open that door again. The last picture was taken seemingly from atop the cot, and clearly showed the giant hole where B had fallen through, which meant that after T had put the camera down so that we could get B out of the hole, someone else had picked it up from beside the hole after we left, carried it and a flashlight over to the mirror, and snapped a picture after setting it down. That had to have happened very quickly, because we were only out of the room for 3 minutes at most. T realized he'd forgotten his camera almost as soon as we'd gotten downstairs. The only ones that were there were T, his mom, myself, and B. His dad and older brother were at work, and even if they had come home, they would have had to pass us on the stairs to get up to the attic. There's just no way that I can logically explain the writing on the mirror, and to this day, I still think about what was in that attic with us. I'm a 24-year-old female, and when I was younger, around 5, my family moved into an old house on the upstairs floor. An older couple lived below us. This was a long time ago, and I was little, but I remember this vividly. When we were first moving in, my mom had to go up to the attic, which, coincidentally, had a door in my room. She took me and my younger brother up with her because I'm assuming she didn't want to leave us unsupervised. I remember not liking it up there. And then the light turned off, and both my brother and I started screaming about red eyes. I do remember them. It wasn't just one, it was a bunch. It turns out that the light had turned off because it was my dad who didn't think anybody was up there. He turned the light back on when he heard the screaming and asked what was going on. My brother and I were hysterical. The thing is that nobody remembers this but me, not even my brother. I would have chalked it up to a bad nightmare or a child's imagination, except that I remember every detail. And then we found out some of the history in the house. It turns out that a mother had actually drowned her child up there. My parents had experiences there as well, but they didn't tell us until later, of course. I feel like that house was the beginning of my acknowledgement, or at least awareness, of the paranormal. And I'll never forget that attic. My family used to go camping with a few group of friends when I was a kid. I remember one Christmas, when I was about 5, we were camping out in the bush. There were 9 kids in total at our campsite. We were allowed to wander through the bush if we wanted to. The parents would give us a walkie-talkie to tell us when to come back to camp, and we never wandered far. Anyway, out of nowhere, an unfamiliar voice came over the walkies. It was a man's voice. He said he was Santa, and that he was trying to find us to give us our presents, and asked us to look for him. We all ran back to our campsite, excited to tell everybody that we had talked to Santa. The walkie-talkie was taken off of us, and we weren't allowed to go anywhere for the rest of the trip. At the time, as kids, we were pretty devastated. But now, as an adult, I understand the seriousness and the creepiness of it, and I'm really glad that we didn't go looking for him. The next story is the account of a Redditor who saw something very strange in a tree on their property. Here's the tale. At the time, my house was situated perpendicular to a wooded area. It was just a normal, lazy summer day. I stepped onto the porch to stretch my legs and get some fresh air. I glanced over toward the tree line and immediately noticed a black silhouette of what appeared to be a man. My eyes are deceiving me, or so I thought. 30 feet in the canopy of an old oak tree, he sat. I was perplexed. At that height, the branches couldn't bear the weight of a squirrel. He was kneeling down, one arm above his head grasping the branch above him, as if to balance himself. Solid black, no defining features whatsoever. It was just a solid black mass, but no doubt it was a man. I was fixated. As I stared at him, I could tell that he was staring right back at me. I could feel it. We stared at each other for what seemed like an eternity. Then, suddenly, he stood up and started running, jumping from tree to tree. Eventually, my house obstructed my view, so I gave chase, but to no avail. As I rounded the corner, he was gone. I ran to the trees but could see nothing except swaying branches on a calm summer afternoon with no wind. That was roughly 25 years ago, but I remember it like it was yesterday. I suppose you don't really forget an experience like that. I had never really given much thought to the paranormal or the otherworldly before that, or after really. It wasn't until about 10 years later, as I was flipping through the channels, that I stumbled across a documentary about shadow people, and I knew immediately that that's what I had witnessed so long ago. Redditor Daydreaming 14 saw her grandma at the mall. It was her grandma, right? Here's the story. When I was 5 years old, I went to the mall with my mom and my sister. When we were walking down some hallway, I noticed a lady in a blue dress with colorful flowers standing next to some mannequins. I said to myself, "Hey, that's Grandma." And I went over to her and we started having a conversation. Obviously, my mom notices that I've run off and goes after me. When she's near me, she says, "Who are you talking to?" To which I reply, "I'm talking to Grandma, of course." Then she replies, "Really? So what's Grandma wearing?" And I said, "A blue dress with colorful flowers." As soon as I said that, my mom grabbed my hand and pulled me away. The thing is, there was no lady with a blue dress and flowers standing there. The thing is that I kept seeing this lady in multiple places with the same dress. 2 years later, I was looking at some family pictures, and I came across a picture of my grandmother on my father's side. I told my mom, "Hey, this is the lady in the blue dress I keep seeing." My mom explained to me that the lady was my grandmother, yes, but she had passed away a year before I was born, and she had been buried in a blue dress with colorful flowers because it was her favorite dress. So, yeah, that's how I met my grandmother, and my mom believes that her spirit is with me because she says that I have the same heart that she had. I care for others, and I love cooking. And my mom says that I get my cooking skills from my grandma. It's been a while since I've physically seen her, but I know she's still there, looking after me in her favorite dress. When Reddit user Barkella went to the theater, they got an unexpected show. Here's what they experienced. To preface this story, I've never believed in ghosts or anything paranormal. I still don't. But this is something that I fully cannot explain. This might be a slightly longer story, but I'll do my best to keep it brief. For context, I have worked at a movie theater for around 8 years. In late 2017, I received a promotion. I became the manager, and I started to close the building at night. In short, besides office work, all that's required to close is to go through each auditorium in the theater and just check to make sure that nobody is still there. The first time anything unexplainable occurred was January 8th of 2018. I was making my rounds as usual, checking each theater to make sure everybody had left. When I got to auditorium number 9, one of the last ones I have to check, I began to walk up the walkway toward the seats when I heard voices. I didn't think much of it, but I was slightly annoyed, as the last movie playing in that auditorium had ended nearly 2 hours prior to my check. It isn't incredibly rare for people to have long conversations after their movie has ended, but 2 hours is a long time. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I could tell that it was a group of 2, a man and a woman. As I approached the end of the walkway and neared the corner to look up at the seats, the couple must have heard my footsteps or keys, because I very clearly heard the man say, "Hold on." I turned the corner and began to say something about us being closed and them needing to head out. Upon looking up at the seats, though, I realized that there was nobody there. I swear by all things holy, I checked behind every seat in the auditorium, behind the screen, absolutely nothing. Besides the entrance to the auditorium where I was walking up, the only other exits are 2 alarmed emergency doors on either side of the screen that lead outside. No alarms were set off, and I checked to make sure that both were functional. Finally, I checked if, for any reason, there was some audio playing in the auditorium. The projector had completed its closing shutdown an hour and a half before, and I was in the theater. While still having no concrete explanation, I chalked it up to me being tired, and I convinced myself that I was just hearing things. Fast forward to a year later, with nothing strange happening, and the second instance occurred. This night, instead of checking each auditorium on the ground level, I chose instead to look in through the small windows in the booth, the upstairs area containing the projectors. While the view of the auditorium below isn't perfect, the top-down view is still enough to tell if any stragglers are still hanging around. I got to auditorium number 9, and peering in, I noticed a couple holding hands in the middle 2 seats of the middle row. I could only barely make out the top of the 2 heads above the seats, and their held hands resting on the cup holder, separating them. Again, I was slightly annoyed as the last movie had broken hours prior, but at that point I had drawn no parallels between this night and the previous one a year sooner. Due to there being an employee staircase directly next to my location in the booth, it took me about 45 seconds to get into the auditorium. Walking up, I heard the muffled voices of a man and a woman, and at this point there was a certain degree of déjà vu. Sure enough, upon rounding the corner, or nearing it anyway, I heard the man say, "Hold on." Immediately realizing the similarity, I paused, took a breath, and turned the corner. Nobody was there. I freaked out, checked under every seat behind the screen. Both alarm doors were completely fine and not triggered, and furthermore, I knew for a fact that the projector was shut down because I had just been up there. This time, I took it a step further in my search for an answer. I checked every exit camera in the entire theater, and there was nothing. I checked the outdoor cameras that view the exit doors of the auditorium, and again, nothing. Finally, I looked at the assigned seating chart for the last show. It was a Hindi-language Bollywood film that had sold 0 tickets that day. Needless to say, nobody was in those seats. I was incredibly uncomfortable, and it only got worse when I realized the date. I kid you not, it was January 8th, 2019. I confirmed the first time was the same date by checking a text conversation that I'd had with a coworker that night, joking about how I was losing it after the first instance. Again, I don't believe in ghosts or the paranormal, but ever since the second instance, I've never checked auditorium number 9 on January 8th. I've thought a lot about it since, though, and I still have no possible clue as to what might have occurred. None of my fellow managers have ever experienced this, but I've also been the only one working the closing shift on January 8th for the last 5 years. If anyone has any theories, I'd be more than interested in hearing them. I honestly don't believe that anything paranormal occurred here. I can provide any further details that are requested, but not the location for obvious reasons. And just for clarification, when I say I don't believe in ghosts or the paranormal, I more so mean in the horror sense. Stuff like horror movie hauntings, throwing chairs, leaving messages in blood, that kind of thing. The Ghost Adventures TV show, for example. The idea of a moment or event being locked in time or souls unable to fully move on for whatever reason is something that I am open to, and I have considered here. I know I sound closed-minded, but I don't mean to. It's just the way that I'm trying to process things. And, honestly, I still don't have a good explanation. This story happened to me about 12 years ago. I was 21 years old, just finished basic training for the Air Force, and I didn't have my tech school for another 6 months, so the Air Force sent me home. While home in Hawaii, my parents decided to take me to Vietnam to visit, as I'm Vietnamese and my mom felt it was important for me to visit the motherland. On the trip, it was my parents, my 4-year-old brother, and my best friend Dan. For most of the trip, we did what normal tourists did. One of our destinations was the city of Kanto. It's a harbor city. Not thinking anything and never really believing in the supernatural, I was also excited to visit historical sites and stay at old hotels. We ended up staying at a hotel that was by a harbor. I don't remember the name of the hotel, but Dan and I shared a hotel room, and my parents and little brother had the next room. I remember going to bed like it was any other ordinary day. I was dreaming, and I saw this figure laying on the bottom edge of my bed. This person was laid in the fetal position. For some reason, my eyes were focused on his feet, then started to slowly move up his body, and then I realized he was naked. Then I saw his face, and at that moment I made eye contact with him, and he stared back at me. Once that happened, I began to have sleep paralysis. I couldn't move. I could hear myself screaming, but nothing was coming out. I kept screaming, "Dan! Dan!" but he could not hear me. So I told myself to calm down and try to burst out, and that's what I did. It worked. I jumped up and woke Dan up. The first thing my friend asked me was why I was so pale. It looked like I'd seen a ghost, he said. I told him what happened. It freaked him out, and we ran to my mom's room and woke them up. My parents asked me what happened. As I was explaining to them what I had experienced, the curtains covering their window began to sway back and forth, and the lights in the room started flickering like crazy. My dad, who's a total skeptic, yelled, "Leave my family alone!" And it just stopped. After several minutes of talking and trying to understand what happened, we went to bed. Dan and I slept in their room on the extra bed. The next day we woke up and my parents were already downstairs eating breakfast. When I went downstairs, my mom greeted me and told me she had someone for me to talk to. It was the hotel manager. She had told him what had happened, and he told me, "Yeah, it happens a lot to people who are in the military." I was confused and asked why. He said this hotel had been built on top of what used to be an American hospital during the Vietnam War, and he said that they were trying to reach out to their comrades. I became a believer in the supernatural then, and have been ever since. I work as a service manager at a Chipotle that is rather understaffed. As the manager, I'm the last one out, and due to staffing, that's usually pretty late. To make matters worse, I commute by bike, so I like to get changed when I finish all my work. This means I'm usually alone for at least 15 minutes in the basement of a strip mall, well after everyone else is gone. From the entire area, not just the restaurant. Because of this, I've heard strange noises and felt a presence behind me. And others have even mentioned being pushed down the stairs, or have reported things being thrown down. We have cameras that look down the staircase, and trust me, it's pretty weird to watch what happens. But the worst was that one night I was here alone until 2 a.m. doing a full inventory. The last employee left at 12:45. The building was locked down, and there wasn't a single other person in the entire strip. But by 1:15, I heard a man and a woman arguing. The sounds were coming from the solid concrete walls. Around 1:30, I heard breathing coming up toward me, so I slammed the office door shut. That didn't stop the breath from coming up to my neck. I could feel pressure on my shoulders. That subsided at 1:50. At 2:10, I was getting changed in the storage room and took my bike out to set the alarm. The second I set the alarm, I hear the sounds of stomping boots running through the kitchen toward the back door, where I was currently in the process of getting out of there. I have never left a building so fast in all my life. My boyfriend of 5 years has crushed on me for probably 12 or 13 years. He was 2 grades below me and was a bad boy, while I was popular and in all honors and college-level classes, so I wasn't aware he existed, until I met him at my dad's business about 7 years ago. He apparently talked about me being his dream girl and teased that it would never happen, so that's why I mention this. In 2009, he and his best friend, I'll call him Josh, were getting into pills due to Josh's grandfather being an amputee and unable to properly attend to or understand the hiding of medications, thus leaving large amounts of all kinds of drugs just lying around. This was before the opiate crisis that has affected my generation deeply in the last 15 years. 2 days before Christmas in 2009, Josh overdosed in the bedroom that my boyfriend is currently staying in. It's a long story, but we moved back to our respective families because we were laid off during the pandemic and were in a bad wreck, losing the extra car. The room has never felt spooky, never anything strange about it. But I've had a few pranks pulled on me that we believe Josh does to basically congratulate my boyfriend on being with the woman that he waited for. I've woken up to sticky notes completely covering my body, my drinks poured on the floor, and random objects moved right where I exit the bed so that I step on them first thing in the morning. I swear I've heard giggling. Each time I've angrily asked my boyfriend if he was messing with me, and I know when he's lying. He always says no. We like to think that it's Josh playing practical jokes, something he was well known for. But this is nothing compared to what Josh did for me in 2017. It wasn't a prank. It saved my life. 4 years ago, I went into anaphylactic shock. I lost all ability to speak or move my lower body. I was upstairs with a curved and steep staircase, separating me from my phone. I remember crawling to the stairs, knowing it could be fatal if I smashed into the wall that the stairs led to, before the turn, with very large, steep steps. I know I was extremely oxygen deprived, but I immediately saw Josh and two of my deceased best friends ascend the stairs and carry me to the living room couch with my nebulizer and cell phone. I called 911, but I had no voice. My friends were gone, except Josh. He told me he was going to wake my boyfriend from the hammock in the back of the yard. And suddenly, my boyfriend dreamed of his friend saying that I was in trouble. My boyfriend came running into the house, and by this point, I was dying. I could no longer use any part of my body, and no air came into my lungs when I inhaled. I remember thinking of my daughter, and praying that her father would navigate my loss, and that he would keep memories of me alive. He actually died in a freak accident 8 months ago, so now I'm fulfilling that for him, but I digress. I struggled to remain conscious, but I was fading. My boyfriend saw the 911 operator on the phone and my sweaty blue body. He told him he didn't think I was breathing, and by some absolute miracle, there was an ambulance passing by my neighborhood. The hospital and dispatch were 30 minutes away. This coincidence, plus my boyfriend's sudden premonition that I was hurt, saved my life. Josh and those EMTs saved my life. I remember the EMT asking my boyfriend if I had overdosed. I hadn't, and I thought of how Josh had died. I was blabbering on about dead people saving me after a large amount of epinephrine, so no wonder they thought I was high. The doctors and EMT were baffled at how I managed to get down those stairs, or even stay alive long enough to get help. I had one bruise on my leg, which was tiny, and that was it, other than the worst headache I've ever had. Turns out I'm allergic to the latex spray paint that we were using. I told them that I slid down the stairs, but that's not how I remember it. The weird thing is, I had never met Josh when he was alive. I don't know how I recognized him, or hallucinated him, or whatever, but he looked exactly like the picture I was shown. I've had a lot of paranormal encounters, but my run-in with Josh saved my life, and he never even knew me. So, thanks Josh for giving me more time on this earth, and I wish we had met many years before. I do hope he's resting peacefully, just periodically popping in to check on us. I have 4 kids. I know that I have 4 kids. But recently, I just feel like there should be another one. But they're missing. When we go out, I head count and I get flustered because I can't find the extra one. I have to consciously remind myself that there are only 4. But my heart just doesn't believe it. I had just put it down as one of those weird feelings and I pushed it aside. Then, my parents sent money to my kids. They sent $100 to each kiddo. They sent me $500. I called them and asked them why they had put in so much, and they were confused and said that they told me they were sending $100 per child. I reminded them that I only have 4 kids. They were silent for a moment, and then just kind of laughed, and said they must be getting old, because they thought there were 5. Then tonight, my daughter walked into the lounge room. She looked around and said, "I know we're all here, but our family feels small." My son agreed. I hadn't said anything to anybody about my feelings lately, because they already think I'm ancient and forgetful at 40. I don't really know what this means, but it's definitely strange. And apparently it's not just me. Does anyone else ever have these feelings? Was my other kid lost in a glitch? I don't know what it could be.